you.
Great, thank you. Yes, clearly we made it out alive, thankfully. Great. Well, hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining our session on adapted journey maps. So of course, since this is a UX conference, it's likely that you have been part of a journey mapping workshop yourself, or you've even created one. So the Nielsen-Norman Group defines journey maps as an infographic visualization of the process that a persona segment goes through in order to accomplish a goal. So in short, a journey map helps tell a user story through a diagram. As stated in the book User Story Mapping, the real goal of using stories is shared understanding, and this is critical for the success of product teams. In some of our recent projects, we have pushed the boundaries of the traditional journey map framework, and today we're here to share with you 4 ways that we've adapted journey map diagrams based on project phase and goals, and things that you'll be able to try as well. So I'm Jody. I am a UX strategist based in London, and my background is in design and psychology. Antonia and I have worked for Cerner, which is a healthcare technology company. I've been on the UX team here for a little over 7 years now, and I've been focused on our clinical electronic patient records for our global clients.
And hi, my name is Antonia. I'm UX designer based in Berlin, and my background is in UI and product design. I've been working at Cerner for a little bit over 4 years, focusing on concept development and design for our next generation patient record. Now, Cerner is a healthcare IT company, and we create integrated solutions that enable our clients to deliver quality care for their communities around the world. For over 40 years, Cerner's expertise at the intersection of healthcare and technology has helped clients deliver better care outcomes and become more operationally efficient. We have over 3 million daily users across clinical and administrative roles, and Cerner continues to invest heavily in innovation to support the clinical transformation of our clients. Driving innovation includes regular adjustments to state-of-the-art technologies for our products. And one of the biggest changes for one of our solutions, called Heatmap, within the last few years was the transition to a cloud platform. The first project for this brand new cloud solution was an emergency department product for our international client base.
Now, the opportunity of a brand new product is exciting, but it's also a bit overwhelming. We learned that there was already considerable research and work that had been started, but it was clear to us that there was not enough structure or planning for this large scope of work. In short, the process had started as it had at our company for decades. It was very technology-driven rather than user-driven. So first, we worked closely with product leadership to help them understand the value of user-centered design. And amazingly, they actually decided to pause development and restart the project with a bigger focus on our end users. So this gave us the opportunity to step back from the development phase and reassess the overall concept to make sure we were building the right solution for the right problem. So today we're going to walk you through some of the journey mapping methods we used to restart this project at a high level, but also guide specific, more detailed projects. As I mentioned, I had joined the team after significant observational research had already been conducted by a variety of associate roles. Antonia, for example, had already visited 6 hospitals across Europe to shadow and interview clinicians in emergency departments. The problem was that there had been substantial research conducted in about 20 hospitals across various countries, but the findings were scattered and had no clear outcome. So the data that had been collected at this point was from associates whose roles ranged from software architecture to clinical IP strategy. Some were experts in their field, some had clinical backgrounds, but some did not. But none of them had formal human factors or research education. But later we did have a researcher join the team. So the impressions and data that the team had collected during these site visits was unstructured, unstandardized for comparison, and thus really hard to communicate and share with other colleagues. So while these efforts did lead to a wealth of information, it was unfortunately not properly shared or utilized in the actual product. So our goal was to find meaning in the data that had already been collected and create a baseline of shared knowledge across our teams. The first method we used was a hybrid between a journey map and a heat map. We'll walk through the steps we took to achieve this. So in order to start bringing together our data in a meaningful way, we created a journey map template in a spreadsheet. This empty framework would then be shared with associates who had conducted site visits to organize their findings. Across the x-axis is the end-to-end emergency department workflow. The workflow stages are across the top row, with specific workflows in the row below. The y-axis included standard types of data typically shown in a journey map, such as user goals, needs, location, emotions, etc. We also added clarifying questions below each heading to help refine the data. We focused on 4 user roles: patient, nurse, physician, and operational or administrative. Each one was given its own separate sheet within the file. We shared the template with everyone who had conducted research and asked them to bring their own observational notes into this template. So then we consolidated all of that information into 4 spreadsheets, one for each role. Now, as you can see, these files became very messy in order to keep track of the reporter and source hospital for each finding. There were some interesting insights already, but of course these spreadsheets were not a useful way to process this information. So next we created a couple of abstracted diagrams in Miro to focus on high-level insights. So here is this journey map heat map hybrid, which helps us see which stages of the workflow we had data documented for or not. We used 3 thresholds and encoded shades of blue to indicate where we had more data. We didn't add color to any cells if there was no data. If we had 1 or 2 findings for a cell, we shaded it light blue, and if we had 3 or more, we shaded it with a darker blue. Now, in some cases, we had no data because the user role was not involved during that phase of the ED journey. But in other cases, we were actually missing data about that workflow stage and user. So these diagrams gave us an overview of where we had information and how much we had. However, of course, we could not yet see how consistent or robust the actual information was. Therefore, we added another visual indicator to describe the quality of that data at a high level. So after reading through the data within the consolidated spreadsheets, we simply added a binary icon marker to cells with 2 or more findings. If the data was consistent, it seemed more valid, but where we had inconsistent, complex, or even conflicting data from our different reporters, it was marked as questionable. So this was just a rough summary of the detailed data, but it still gave us actionable direction. These heat maps are high-level abstracted diagrams of a multitude of individuals' research findings. The consistent framework of a journey map allowed us to bring that data together in a meaningful way. And this output could be used to determine future research needs and could be utilized by a human factors researcher and a product team to make future research plan decisions. So here's a summary slide of the heat map journey map. We will share this for each of the 4 methods we're going to describe today. Please feel free to take a screenshot for your future reference. It's going to recap when to use each method, plus the goal, tips, and steps for doing that. So if you want to try your own heat map journey map, make sure you have focused time set aside for the tedious tasks of data consolidation and encoding. We recommend using 3 thresholds for bucketing your data quantitatively. The lowest range should not have any color applied, and then you should use 2 shades of the same color hue, one with higher intensity for the highest threshold. You might find that actually a different quantitative measure or different type of layered indicator to map into your journey map makes more sense. So get creative, and we'd love to hear what other ways you use this. After we had these high-level insights, Antonia began to create detailed journey maps and diagrams based on the data within the spreadsheets. So now she's going to walk you through how she used the spreadsheet data to create unique diagrams based on the classic user journey map framework.
To make the detailed input from the spreadsheets more consumable, we needed to summarize all findings, sort out duplicates, and state them in a short bullet point style. This already made the user journey maps easier to consume. Still, these journey maps are very text-heavy and it takes a lot of time to read through them. On top of that, while doing this consolidation, we identified some interesting insights and connections and needed a way to highlight and share these aspects with the whole group. So as a first step, we used illustrations within the map itself to highlight certain aspects graphically. For example, we used a simple curve to illustrate if sense of control and understanding is high, medium, or low, and how it evolves throughout the user journey. This illustration highlights the user's biggest pain points, which we want to solve with our future ED solution. To understand when mobile and when desktop solutions would support the user best, we first indicated with a pin icon the number of locations of each workflow column. Second, we marked all pin icons standing for the location of a documentation desk in black. This visualization helped us to identify at the first glance which workflows are performed at a desk only, and we concluded that desk-only workflows would be supported best on stationary desktop solutions. In contrast, we see several workflows for which the user needs to switch today between patient-facing and documentation desk actions. So we concluded that these workflows with changing locations would be supported best with mobile applications in future. As a next step, we brought the individual user journey maps in context to each other, since many actions are not performed alone. In this example, we extracted the information on emotions and sense of control and understanding for the three roles of nurse, physician, and patient. This method can be done digitally as we did, or physically by actually printing it out and cutting out individual lines. Now, looking closer at these two aspects, we captured in a third line the role of the person who is physically with the user during this part of the journey. If we focus now on the negative emotions, which we want to prevent with our future ED solution, of course, we can easily see which roles are together with someone at this point of time and might help to prevent or get out of negative emotions. Because the focus of our solution will be especially on nurses and physicians, we look closer at their data. Now, in this example, we extracted the data on goals, needs, and actions from both nurses and physicians. Based on that data, we summarized the kind of information each role produces within a workflow step. Next, we connected these cells to draw a clear picture of when information is shared and in which workflow steps it is consumed by other colleagues. This helped us to identify workflow steps which are documentation-focused versus review-focused. These methods highlighted certain findings and brought them in context to each other. No matter how many insights you include, everyone in the team should review the diagram on their own to capture all details. But user journey maps often contain an overwhelming amount of information. So visual highlights help the reader to pay special attention on the details the creator identified as important to focus on. On top of that, extracting individual lines of several roles and bringing them in context to each other help to illustrate additional aspects and connections. Now, when you're planning to try out this method with your team, don't be afraid to cut up your user journey map, even though you spend hours working on it. Try to print it out physically and play around with different arrangements. Write down the findings you see in these connections and which are the most important to you. Then share them with your colleagues and discuss which details draw their attention. I hope you enjoy the creative process and uncover interesting patterns.
So far, we have focused on two methods of adapted journey maps that can be useful for early project stages and high-level insights. So these diagrams can help inform product planning and project scope decisions, which is exactly what happened for our emergency department project. From this point, we continued on with subject matter expert sessions, workshops, and user validation activities before moving on to feature planning. The culmination of the journey maps and additional research afterwards helped us to articulate the user needs. As shown on the classic product management Venn diagram, user needs are one perspective of insights that could be used by product management for creating a product vision and project roadmap. We also uncovered areas where additional research was necessary, which could be prioritized by the internal and external validation of our opportunities. These visualizations and documents created a baseline of user-centered understanding that could be shared and discussed across a variety of roles and teams. Finally, we also found that sharing these insights in a presentation format, along with the diagrams and raw files, became useful onboarding material for new colleagues joining the project. So several large topics were extracted and prioritized from the concept phase outputs. So after additional time and decisions from product management, we shifted into feature planning for more specific project-based work. So now Antonia and I will focus on activities that UX performed during the feature planning phase. At this point in the project, our team had grown with the addition of a human factors researcher, new solution designers, and several other roles. Different product teams were established to support the various features for our first release. The feature we will focus on as an example for our next two methods is documenting vital signs. The goal here was to support quick documentation and review of a patient's vital signs in an emergency department. This feature would be the first cloud-based tool to be accessed from the legacy ISH Med product. We had a good overview from product management about what capabilities the user should have, but there were varying opinions about the details. So we didn't have clear answers for some questions such as, when is the action of documenting vital signs mandatory and not task-driven? What types of vital signs need to be documented? Our objective was to create a holistic overview of how vital signs work within an emergency department in order to refine the feature and project scope. So the first draft of the system level requirement stated, as a clinician, I need to be able to add and review vital signs and measurements documented for the patient in the system in order to assess the patient's condition. So this was a bit too general, so we wanted to make it more specific. So we planned a workshop with internal SMEs with the goal of gathering more details on documenting, reviewing, and ordering vital signs for the 4 roles of ED nurse, triage nurse, ED physician, and referral physician within an ED. Antonia will now describe these sessions, as well as 2 additional journey mapping methods that we used for detailed planning of a project scope.
So just like for the previous examples we shared, we displayed high-level workflow steps for this template on the x-axis. Our findings from earlier journey maps gave us a lot of information to start with. We knew which steps could be bundled together because they contain similar information. Having more generic workflow steps created a more open discussion for each cell instead of limiting the interviewed SME to a very specific topic. Across the y-axis, we displayed 3 main action types related to vital signs: documentation, review, and ordering. In the workshop, we first asked if vital sign documentation is relevant for this workflow step. If not, we changed the color of the field and continued by asking if any vital signs are reviewed, then if they are documented, and made our way in that manner very efficiently through the whole journey map. If the question was answered with yes, we had a closer look at this action. So the first aspect we discussed was the type of vital sign. For example, if a standard set is used or if very individual measurements for each patient condition are considered. The second aspect was the context, meaning further clinical data focused on. In this workflow step, this information helped us to understand the importance of vital signs in a certain situation in relation to other aspects of a clinician's work. Context is highly related to the third aspect we looked at, dependencies. Is this vital sign action mandatory? And if not, what are the conditions requiring this action? Now, after running through these questions with all SMEs and summarizing their input, we had a very solid big picture about vital signs in the emergency department. At a first glance, the user journey maps show with a gray-colored cell in which workflow step, documentation, review, or ordering actions are even relevant for each role. Looking closer at the cell, we find detailed information about type, context, and dependencies for each vital sign action. This information can provide insights not only for the small scope we focused on, but provide us detailed information for future vital sign projects. When you apply this method, we recommend using higher-level workflow steps to foster a more open discussion. We also recommend asking if the action category is even relevant for a role before drilling into details. This saves time and energy, which ensures the data collected at the end of the journey map will be as high quality as it was at the beginning. For displaying your work outcomes, use different background colors for cells with and without content. This way, you can see at a first glance which actions are relevant for a user.
So this data was already a great source of information, which would prove useful far beyond our first small project scope. However, we still needed to find answers to questions such as, when do clinicians need to document data which is not triggered by an event? Which roles perform this task? And what type of data do they need to document? Antonia will now share our final method, which helped answer those questions and refine the boundaries of the project.
To be able to answer our open questions, we would need to identify individual use cases stated within the user journey map. So far, the user journey maps contain for many workflows multiple use cases, which we would need to extract. For that, we created a small visual for each user story. The frame of that visual described the action category, so if the user story is about documenting, reviewing, or ordering a vital sign. Within the frame at the top right, we stated the workflow as it was positioned at the x-axis of the journey map. At the bottom right, we called out the user's roles, such as the individual user journey maps were titled. At the top left, we described the content type. To be able to identify patterns in our data, we used a very limited set of content types. And this was very easy to identify since the SMEs we interviewed already used patterns themselves when filling it out with us. So for documentation and ordering, we used the content types of standard items and special items. And for reviewing actions, we found in the user journey maps the recurrent content types of last data, a trend of all vital signs, and highlights of measurements out of the normal range. Now, in the last quarter, we stated if this use case is a mandatory action or if it is triggered by an event. We decided not to get into details such as type of event at this point so that we could more easily identify patterns. In this manner, we described all use cases stated within the user journey maps. And knowing that some of our colleagues prefer textual descriptions instead of illustrations, we phrased a sentence in a standardized way to describe the action. After extracting the individual use cases, we mapped them across the workflow steps. This was our basis to identify the use cases matching our open questions. Since we wanted to identify documentation use cases, we first filtered down our overview to documentation use cases only. Next, we highlighted the type of data to identify at a first glance if it is about standard or special items. Since we wanted to focus on use cases which are not triggered by an event, we marked and filtered to the ones which are mandatory to be performed. This left us with a single use case and answered the main question we had before starting the workshop. The only use case we need to focus on is that it's mandatory that during triage, standard items are documented by a triage nurse. This gave the team and us the information they needed to more clearly define the project scope. After the workshop, the system-level requirement was rewritten, as you can see on the slide. Now, on top of answering our research questions, we were able to highlight even more insights. For example, it was possible to display the workflow steps when the vital sign measurements documented during triage are reviewed again. After the triage nurse entered the standard set of vital signs, we plan to display only the most recent values in the same component. With our overview, it was possible to highlight that the last data of vital signs is reviewed during anamnesis and care and treatment, mainly by physicians as well as referral physicians. Now, when you're planning to apply this method in your project, we recommend not to use too many variables for content types and dependencies. This would make it easier to identify patterns across the user journey maps. When you communicate your findings back to the team, make sure you present the outcome both with visuals and text. Having a textual description for each of the visualization makes sure that everyone interprets it in the right way. We also recommend exporting each step when sorting through the user journey maps. This will make it easier for your colleagues to understand your thoughts and sorting process.
So these final two methods of adapted journey maps are useful for detailing user actions in order to refine features, organize use cases, and make project scope decisions. So this led us into phase 3 of Cerner's development process, which is architectural design. From this point, we were able to move forward with further specifying feature details and user stories, beginning the front-end conceptual design, and creating a great product that actually meets the needs of our end users. We thank you for joining us as we walked through 4 methods of adapted journey maps that were useful for us as we restarted a large-scale project. As we reflected on the overall process and experience, a few high-level takeaways became clear to us. First, journey maps truly are a powerful tool for keeping a group focused on the user. We saw colleagues who had never participated in design thinking before really empathizing with the user and considering this new perspective. Next, you can get really creative with your diagrams. There are unlimited ways to compare, cut, highlight, and display your data in order to tell a meaningful story. And these diagrams aren't just to support UX work. Our product management and solution design colleagues also found these visualizations useful for making project scope decisions and planning features. Additionally, our architecture and engineering team members appreciated understanding the big picture of what we are building and why. Now, once we got rolling with detailed project work, we realized how easily and quickly teams can get lost in their own specific focus. So we used both formal and informal methods to come back to this data and the big picture for our user to help our teams keep that in mind. Finally, we also realized the power of focusing on user problems to encourage innovation. Through these tools and methods, our teams could better empathize with end users and were inspired to create the best solution with our product. So from high-level heat maps to detailed user story diagrams, we hope that you have found our process interesting and inspiring for your own work. We would love to hear if you try out any of these methods or try something new. Please feel free to reach out with any ideas or questions you have. We'll close with a great quote from the book, Mapping Experiences. The objective is not just to create a diagram, but to engage others in conversations and develop solutions together as a team. We hope you have fun with this. Thank you.
Jody, Antonia, thank you so much for that awesome and insightful talk. And those visualizations as well. I love data visualization. I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please add them to the Ask a Question component at the bottom. Just reading some of the comments. This was really great, technical and insightful. Thank you so much. Awesome talk. There doesn't seem to be any questions yet. Just checking if there are any more questions from anyone. Okay, everybody's commenting positively, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, if something comes up later, we are also happy to connect via LinkedIn or drop us a message via mail. We're always curious to hear about other examples and talk about user journey maps.
Thank you. Well, a question from my side. I mean, I know that you've been working with data visualization for a while now, and it reminds me of works like by David McCandless, those kind of, what's it? I think it's Information is Beautiful, something like that. So with that said, and you're constantly working with data visualization and mapping, is there an intention to create some kind of template or templates, or some kind of, I guess, library that you can constantly reuse and also maybe even share?
The initial user journey maps were based on common templates, and maybe others who worked on or with user journey maps noticed that the categories we choose at the beginning were quite standard. And of course, we reused portions of user journey maps over the time. But since we needed to adjust to each topic a little bit more, and also learned with previous user journey maps, there was no true template to use over and over again. For example, we learned over time that we need to become more generic with the individual workflow steps. So that was reworked. And we also found that we have to be more precise for certain in-depth topic, like vital signs as a focus topic has to, we have to ask different questions than as in comparison to this whole ED journey, which is just a bit more high level by nature.
Okay, thank you. We've got one question from Pete, and the question is, how long did this whole process take that you've just gone through?
Good question. So I guess from the point that we kind of restarted and we sent out that those blank spreadsheets for people to fill in their data, I think we gave people a couple of weeks to, bring their notes into the template. And then it took a couple of weeks to kind of sort through that and collate all the information. And then we kind of glossed over it, but we had some internal workshops and kind of some different activities with end users from different clients and things like that. So I guess it's kind of a complex question to answer. But I think, like at least a couple of weeks kind of for more of this technical, the visualization work itself, at least 2 to 4 weeks kind of for each section. Maybe Antonia, how long with those workshops that you ran, kind of what were some of the timeframes for those pieces?
Yeah, around a month, I would say. But of course, you need to calculate some preparation time to truly, schedule meetings, find time in the calendars of SMEs. I guess that's always a little bit underestimated. And also sharing the data later on shouldn't be underestimated. So the workshop itself might overtake a relatively small amount of time, but really making use of the data and making sure it's shared and understood and also people are taking action on might be even a continuous task, which can't be closed out that easily.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you. Thank you for that, Antonia. We've got one more question. What did you do to help stakeholders buy into the UJM process, if indeed you had to convince them?
Another great question. I think it's, I don't think there's any perfect formula. Of course, it depends on the person or the people that you're working with. I think for us, maybe a little bit of luck plays into it as well. We had a situation in which the kind of leadership of this product had kind of been, kind of trying to get this thing started in the right way. And there had been kind of a couple of attempts at that. And I think that there was a general feeling of we're kind of missing something, or just this isn't quite, the right direction. And so I think it was kind of good timing to be able to come in and say, hey, this actually is the best thing we can do, is to make sure that we're really focusing on our user And so I think that just kind of clicked that, okay, we've tried kind of from this just technology-based perspective. We've tried just, thinking more from a business perspective. But actually, it does make sense to, take that step back and think about the end user. So, as like conversations, sharing examples. So we had, people from with our team is centralized within our company. So we had examples from other products, kind of walk through a project experience and then the impact that had. And I think, it does just kind of take time. We also had a leader that was kind of able to talk to that one particular executive kind of on a peer-to-peer level. And I think that really helped as well. So I think it's a lot of different angles and depends on the person, but examples are helpful, and ultimately, the user is always the best place to start. So, but it takes some humility, I think, sometimes for other types of practitioners to realize that and not just focus on technology or finances or those types of things.
And
Thank
maybe
you.
one thing to add there, because on one hand, you need the arguments to truly start with user-centered design methods. And on the other hand, you need the people to really stay with it and stay engaged. And I guess one key in that was that we used material from our colleagues from previous site visits. Some of our colleagues are physicians by education, so they had real-life examples. And not just going out and doing the same research again, but actually utilizing their knowledge and making them true stakeholders within that process was key, and really valued their previous studies and knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to check if there are any more questions. I'll forward them to you. I'm just conscious of time. Thank you so much for the awesome and insightful talk.
You're welcome.